No, I actually don't see a lot of change in the Chinese position when it comes to its support for Russia and the war in Ukraine. From the beginning, the Chinese have made it clear that they would like to see a resolution to this conflict as quickly as possible. That hasn't changed. Of course, they'd like to see the war end as soon as it can. But they talk, Yang Yi talked about in his speech today points that he's raised, that Chinese leaders have raised in the past: peaceful resolution to the conflict that respects legitimate security interests of all parties. Well, that means respecting Russia's rights as they see it to not have to be side by side with a potential NATO or Western ally. They talk about the use of proxies and how the threat that proxies could boomerang against countries that use them. Well, here he's referring to what they see as American support for Ukraine as a proxy for its own aggression in the region. So this has been typical Chinese rhetoric. It comes in the context of the statement the other day where the Chinese, where Putin was expressing some concern in front of Xi Jinping about where the Chinese stand with questions about the war. So it does have a little bit of a different tone. But nevertheless, I don't see China backing away from its support for Russia. I think it continues to have a strong stake in an outcome to this crisis in which Russia succeeds, in which Ukraine is defeated. It wants to use this as a precedent potentially on Taiwan and the way it looks at the crisis or a potential flashpoint in its own neighborhood. So having the West and the U.S. and its allies defeated in Ukraine, setting a precedent for the use of force in this kind of way successfully would be something of benefit strategically to China.
And Mr. Jain, that's where we see the relationship being mutually beneficial. You mentioned Taiwan. The Chinese foreign minister was very forceful in his words on Taiwan. And then we had the Russian foreign minister backing him effectively and saying that we support what China wants.
Exactly. They both see the world in similar ways. The Chinese see Taiwan as an integral part of their country. Russia sees Ukraine as a historical part of its larger territory. So it's no surprise again to see China being forceful in reiterating its previous claims that only a peaceful resolution to Taiwan, the unification of Taiwan, would set the boundaries for a stable global order. Russia backs that position, basically setting the terms to say once again that if Taiwan is not settled, the Chinese aren't going to respect a peaceful or stable situation in the Indo-Pacific. We're seeing that very clearly in real time with the exercises that the Chinese conducted just a few weeks ago surrounding the island, what looked like a practice run for a blockade or a potential military intervention around Taiwan. This is a real potential crisis in the making.
Of course, the UN General Assembly was dominated by Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. Most countries singing from the same hymn sheet and having the same message to Russia. There are, though, as well as Russia and China, some that are more on the fence. India is one of them. Any words from the Indian delegation?
Yeah, well, we saw Prime Minister Modi again when he met with Russian leader Putin last week. A suggestion that maybe India was backing away from its kind of neutral stance, not criticizing Russia, not backing away from its economic support. But in fact, I think India remains kind of grounded in this position of not taking sides. I don't see India taking a different stance with regard to the war. It doesn't support the war, but it doesn't want to come out openly to call on Russia to end the conflict or to end its premium kind of discounts on oil that it's receiving from the Russians. So I don't see a real change taking shape. Today's speech by the Indian foreign minister didn't really have anything new to offer. Of course, they again called for peaceful resolution to the crisis as quickly as possible. It's no time for war, he said, but that's again just consistent with India's position that they wouldn't want to see this conflict extended out. In fact, there's not in anyone's interest let alone the Russians, to see this conflict extended out. Really, the question is how does it end and who succeeds?
I wonder if finally you can give us your perspective of what you have thought, what you have made of this United Nations General Assembly.
You know, it's interesting. 2022, I think we'll look back at the beginning of what's becoming a long-term strategic competition for the global order. And you saw that in speech after speech at the Security Council this year. The US and President Biden staking out a position about what's at stake in this strategic competition between democracies and autocracies. And then China and Russia, strong and strident, pushing back on that vision of a global order and suggesting a very different type of world that they would like to see and advanced, one that's safe for autocracies effectively. And then others, of course, Western allies, Australia, the European allies coming forth with their own versions, siding with the idea of a rules-based system. So we are seeing kind of lines being drawn, sides taken, others staying on the fence, like India and much of the developing world. It's the kind of world I think we're going to be seeing play out here over the next years and maybe decades.